Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week? Now, with the COVID 19 going into its third season due to the most recent wave of the Omicron variant, the CDC has come under fire for its handling of recent pandemic recommendations and comments by CDC Director Rochelle Walensky. Now, on Good Morning America, Walensky stated the overwhelming number of deaths, over 75%, occurred in people who had at least 4 comorbidities. So, really, these are people who were unwell to begin with. And yes, really encouraging news in the context of Omicron. Now, many people were horrified with the idea that the deaths of people with disabilities and chronic conditions can be seen as encouraging news. In a letter to Walensky, the Disability Rights and Defense Fund wrote, "Your words convey that the deaths of disabled people are acceptable. It perpetuates widely and wrongly held perceptions that disabled people have a worse quality of life and our lives are more expendable." So I want to ask you, Daquon, do you think that the CDC recent recommendation shifts in Walensky's comments are problematic?
Child. Problematic is an understatement. Like, if we
Honestly.
are being honest, problematic is the understatement of the year
Yeah.
already. Because this is beyond problematic. Like the Disability Defense Fund and Rights said, like, you are essentially saying that, oh, disabled, it's only the disabled people who are dying. They have all of these comorbidities, like they're already so sick. So like that's encouraging because us healthy people aren't dying. Like it's
Hmm.
fine. And it's like, Rochelle, we gotta talk. Let's
Can
just
we
like talk
talk?
a
Can we
minute.
talk?
Rochelle, you're listening, Rochelle? Like,
I
see
believe we're on
me.
a first name basis. Rochelle,
We're
listen.
on a first name. I don't do that, Miss Walensky. Rochelle, we're right here. How the fuck are people dying? Encouraging news. In what world do you think that people dying should be encouraging news? I think that people dying from this pandemic that we have not been able to have a grasp on really ever is not encouraging. It's incredibly disheartening and incredibly problematic to say something like this because you are saying that these American lives are worth less than others. These American lives are expendable. We don't need them. If they die out, oh well. And the reality is, so many Americans in this country have comorbidities. So many people in general, when you think about what is a comorbidity, like it's not just the cancers of the world. Anything like joint pain could be a comorbidity.
Hmm.
You know, having a caffeine addiction is a
Hmm.
comorbidity. You know, all of these different things that so many people suffer from are comorbidities. So it's really disheartening because if you just look at the people in your life, you probably know somebody with a couple, if not four or more comorbidities. So imagine Walensky talking to you about your friend or your mother or your father or whoever in your life is important to you, your loved one, and being like, they may die from COVID 19, but that should be encouraging to you because you're not, because you're so healthy. Would you
Quote
really
unquote.
consider that encouraging news?
Exactly. I think there are so many things, and I think I want to just kind of just kind of go into it a little bit with the comorbidities. I mean, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis, sleep apnea, depression, breast cancer, and some of the other in the mental health field: depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, PTSD, panic disorder, social anxiety, OCD, and so many more things are considered medically as comorbidities. Now, I don't know about you, Daquan, but I know several people in my life who have suffered with one of these, even one or if not multiples of these things that I've listed.
Right.
And these are just the few that I were able to look up. There are several more out there that are some very common things that most people have either dealt with themselves personally or know someone personally who has dealt with it. And for me, it's like it really reminds us how far and deep ableism runs in our society, because it's the fact that she was able to make these comments, because we all know that when we make a big statement like this, or when someone like her makes a statement like this, it's gone through research teams, it's gone through her publicist, it's gone through so many different people who have talked to her and said X, Y, and Z is what you say, and X, Y, and Z means this, and this is how it affects these people, and blah, 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 whatever, so on and so on. And so it's crazy because in this case, we know that this has gone through probably several channels up before it got to her and before she announced it and made this statement. And so it really shows that even the people within the medical field believe that disabled people or people who have comorbidities have less value in society than people who don't.
Right.
And it's oftentimes because we very much so live in an individualistic society, especially in America. We believe that if it doesn't affect me personally, it's not real. Does that make sense? So it's like, I've noticed something too. We learned about this in like China and Korea and stuff like that. They live in a very much sort of community-based society. And so like in their society, it's almost kind of frowned upon. Like if you have, if you're sick and you have to go to work, you know, it's normalized to put a mask on and put gloves on and to stay with people and say, hey, I'm sick, I can't X, Y, and Z, or hey, just so you know, like that. In America, we don't have that same kind of awareness of other people. We don't have that same kind of, oh, if I'm feeling bad, maybe not hug this person, or I'm feeling bad, maybe I should keep my distance from people so I don't infect other people. It's the reason why the mask discussion is such a big thing in America, because why so many people, especially if you see online, how many people are angry about having to wear a mask, and why it's mostly in America that we see these very vitriol reactions to having to wear a mask. And it's because we live in a society that believes that as long as once again, if it's not affecting me because I'm a healthy person and I live and I'm doing the right things, so I don't have to worry about the other people as long as I'm good. And so we realize that even in this particular, especially in the medical field, we know this is a really, really big thing, that there is a lesser value for people who have pre-existing conditions. Again, these conditions are things that are sometimes, again, not things that they controlled. Sometimes some people are just born with those particular comorbidities, and it's very disheartening, especially with people like science and medicine. These are the people that are supposed to protect humanity. These are the people that we rely on to make sure that we are safe. And we're realizing now, just like we realized before too, especially with Black lives, is that in the medical field, especially too, also that institutionalized racism runs deep and that ableism runs deep as well. And so we know that in the society, we know that in that particular situation, disabled lives don't matter in the grand scheme of things to the medical field. In the medical field, if you come into the office and you're feeling sick and you are overweight or you're whatever, that's the first thing they're talking about. That's the first thing, that's the issue. It doesn't have anything. They don't want to test you because they know that's the problem. And they just quote unquote know. And I say that very like that. They think they know, but they don't even take the time to actually take the test necessary to make sure that it is that, and if that really is the issue. And so it really just harkens back to this idea, because we know that disabled people are living very well. Some of them have very high qualities of life. And I'm sure no one chooses to have these pre-existing conditions, but they have it. And so the medical field is supposed to be able to take care of all people, not just the people who they deem healthy. Because of all of society, if every single person in the world, we know that for a fact that even just in races, that our bodies react differently to certain things in certain cultural, in certain racial groups. We also know that in this field of medicine, there are several different avenues to take for different situations. And for me, it almost feels a little bit like laziness. It's like, as long as we get the people who are normal, quote unquote, we're good. Everybody else can go to hell. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it feels to me.
Right. And I'm so glad that you brought up racism because this is the Melanin Margin. You know, conversations about race are never off of the table. And we have to talk about how racism and ableism and classism, all of these different isms and phobias are all different heads of the same beasts. They're all intertwined and interconnected. And so
Exactly.
when I hear a statement like this, it is saying if you are not, you know, this white, cis, healthy, privileged person,
Your
your
life
life
doesn't.
does not matter. Because we have to be real. African American, like sickle cell is a comorbidity, and that's prevalent in African American communities. Type 1 diabetes, high
High
blood
blood
pressure,
pressure.
high
Hmm.
cholesterol, very prevalent in a lot of different minority communities. And it's all intertwined because you think about it, if you only are able to get really sodium filled foods because that's
Mm.
all you can afford,
All you
and
can
then
have
you get
access
that
to.
pre-existing condition of hypertension, and now we're just telling you, oh, this was something that you really couldn't control, and now you have to suffer because of it. So it's really frustrating to hear these types of comments because let's be honest, the CDC this year, they haven't been on it. Like chop when they were like 5, I was like, I can't deal with this being like all of this influence of capitalism and literally CEOs of businesses being to the CDC. Our workers, they can't be out for this long. They can't do no 10-day quarantine. Like, cut that down. And then CDC cut it down to 5. Yes, they say that there's science behind it, but as a public health institution, you know, public health should be at your first and foremost. Like, yes, there may be suggestions that it's okay to cut down to 5 days for quarantine as opposed to the 10 it was beforehand. But I don't know about you. Maybe it's just like scientists being like off the wall or whatever. But like, I like to err on the side of caution,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to people's lives. And so these decisions that the CDC has made, these comments are not putting so many marginalized lives in the center when they are the most vulnerable groups. Everybody, when the pandemic was starting, was talking about these essential workers, they're heroes, they're doing all of these things. And now it's just like, you're an essential worker and you die. Oh, well, sucks to suck.
And I think it's even it's so crazy because when we talk about this discussion, we say Black Lives Matter, and people are like, first thing they say is all lives matter, don't they? Wait a minute, what were you saying? And and it's kind of like even in this conversation, we're talking about disabled lives. We know that in our society, it's easier. We know even from history standpoint, that disabled people or people who are neurodivergent, they were thrown away by their families because they didn't want to handle the workloads. Many of the family members had to, especially back in the day when asylums were a thing and lobotomies and stuff like that. They put them away because they didn't want to deal with a person who thought differently than them, who thinks, whose mind works differently than them, whose body has to move differently than them, whose functionality works differently from them. And it's because we live in a society where we think that, once again, people who have disabilities, the people who are neurodivergent, they have a worse quality of life, or they aren't giving back. And I think that that's where it gets into it. We're a very production driven society, and so we think that if you're not able to produce at the highest level and highest quality, then you are not important because you are not bringing something to the table. But I do think that we need to stop acting as if disabled people are not working, disabled people are not doing things, disabled people are not living. They're out here doing what they're doing. And I think that we really have to get out of this idea of infantilizing disabled people and neurodivergent people, and recognize that they are fully embodied human beings. And yes, they may have a different functionality than you. Yes, their mind may work differently from yours, but their life matters just as much as yours. Your life does not matter more. And so I think that we need to understand that in this case, like we say, Black Lives Matter, disabled lives matter, because those are the lives that are at stake.